And welcome to the Hoop Heads Podcast. It's Mike Lensing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel tonight, and we're going to start off the same way we started off last week, Jay, with not really much NBA in the way of news to talk about. So we're going to go with I don't know, a gimmick. Is that what we're calling it?
I mean, I guess it is somewhat topical. I mean, because of an event that happened today. But so Mike and I were texting, and I was like, "What are we talking about tonight?" And he's like, "I'm gonna come up with a gimmick." I said, "Well, John Wall announced his retirement today, which, by the way, I didn't realize he hadn't retired already." And I said, and the immediate thought that came to my mind was guys whose NBA career was cut short or derailed by injury. And we're just going to kind of talk about three guys each. And, you know, I'm, you know, we left it kind of there. We didn't say they had to be like theoretical superstars or any success, but guys whose careers, chances to be derailed by injury. So I don't know. Mike, would you like to go first or would you like me to go first?
Let's have you go first. You have one that you're, I think, excited to share that
Well,
has
I'm
a high
excited to share
obscurity
because
factor. So
so
I
this
always
this
like
goes
high obscurity factor guys.
well, yeah. Well, it's not. I don't know. I don't think he's obscure. I want to be clear here. What if I say this guy? Because you're going to know this name, and most of our listeners are going to know this name that are of the age of at least, I would say if you're at least 20, 22, you probably know this name. So this is not completely obscure. But there's a funny story as to why this guy popped into my head right away. So a few of my buddies and I used to really play NBA. It was at the time NBA Live, and he was my favorite player to play as at NBA Live because I swear to God he didn't miss a shot. Video game NBA Live, and I also just was a huge Portland Trails Blazers fan. Like, you know where I'm going with this?
Portland, man, there's a lot of ways you can go in Portland. I think I know which way you're going, but
I'm
Portland has, I would say, four tremendous candidates for this list. So I'll let you share the one that you're going to
His
share,
first season
and
he
then we
played
can.
57 games. The second season he played 74 games. The third season he played 78 games. The fourth season he played 65 games. Then he played 47 games. He retired. He attempted to come back with the Minnesota Timberwolves and played 5 games, and then he re-retired. I am, of course, talking about Brandon Roy. Brandon Roy was my favorite player to watch. I don't know why. Portland, first of all, I didn't watch a lot of Portland Trailblazers games, but I just really got into it. And you just look at, he won Rookie of the Year his first season. He played 55. He played 57 games, started 55 of them. His second season, he was an All Star. Third season, played 78 games. Obviously, his most productive season. Okay, uh, he was shooting three threes a game, okay, until, yeah, three threes a game. He was taking like 20 shots a game, and just like efficiency was good. Effective field goal percentage his third season, in which he finished ninth in the MVP voting. He effective field goal percentage was 512. Uh, Free throw, he was a great free throw shooter. He was shooting in his eight. He shot 80% for his career, but he had a dip in two of his seasons, but every other season he was great. I just remember watching him play and his shot, like, he was a pure shooter before Steph Curry. He was just a good player, a hard worker. I loved playing as him in NBA Live, and that's the name that came to my head when I first came up with this topic. There's two other names that I'm sure we'll both talk about possibly, but he was the guy that first came to my head, because I just always remembered, you know, it's kind of funny when I think about him coming back for that 5 game stretch. I remember how excited I was that he was coming back to the NBA. He played 5 games and he was like, "I'm out." It's kind of like every single time Tiger Woods comes back from an injury or comes out and starts to play again, and then like you're like, "Well, I'm gonna enjoy this for the 2 weeks it's gonna last before he gets injured again." Um, so and in those 5 games, Mike, he played 24 minutes a game in those 5 games. He averaged 6 points in 24 minutes. So I don't really have a strong recollection of what those games looked like, if it was an end of the season situation or if it was like the beginning of a season and then he got injured again. I don't really honestly remember. I just remember him coming back for a few games and then being like, I'm retiring again. I tried, or something along those lines.
So I'm looking up the end of his career. It doesn't say at what point during that season that he came back. It does say that the Timberwolves waived him in May, which ended up being the end of Brandon Roy's career, and he was 29 years old. My recollection of Brandon Roy, I just remember him as being a guy that had was multidimensional, that he could handle the ball, he could shoot it, he could play in the mid range, he was unselfish. He just did, when you think about sort of the old school NBA two guard, like I don't think of him necessarily as a 3-point shooter. I don't know if you look up his career stats for while I'm talking, maybe as a career 3-point shooter. Like I don't remember him being an elite 3-point shooter. Maybe I'm wrong. I remember him more operating kind of in the mid range, more
Well,
in
okay,
the
so
realm of like,
here you go, Mike. He shot. So my recollection of being a great 3-point shooter is probably based on a video game. So just to be clear
there we
here,
go.
okay?
Okay.
So
All right.
about me relying on him jacking up threes as the Portland Trailblazers, because he was only a 35% from behind the arc 3-point shooter.
Okay. Okay.
He shot 48% from the 2-point field goal territory. I looked it up, Mike, and he did sign in July of 2012. He played. I don't understand Roy. This is what it says. Roy's comeback was short-lived. He played in just 5 regular season games before suffering a knee injury in a preseason game. But if he played in 5 regular season games and he suffered a knee injury in a preseason game, I'm gonna guess that the AI spread is not correct here, but maybe he played 5 regular season games and then he got an injury in a regular season game. But it was because of his degenerative knee injury. Knee.
I'm guessing that he was probably a late season signee. Is if this is just me
Well,
guessing.
it says he was signed July 31st, 2012. Though.
Okay, so who knows?
I'm thinking he
Anyway,
played some preseason games. He played 5 regular season games and then he got injured again.
fact is, he played in 5 regular season games, and that was the end of his NBA career. But like I said, I remember him more in the mold of, and I'm not comparing his ultimate career to Jordan or Kobe, but I picture him as that kind of player, a guy who was multidimensional, somebody who could handle the ball, somebody who could play in the mid range, somebody who was a really good scorer, somebody who was good on the defensive end of the floor. So kind of like a poor man's Jordan, Kobe. That's when I think of Brandon Roy. That's what I think of in terms of the way that he was as a player. And it's funny when you talk about the sort of connection to Brandon Roy, and yours was through a video game and remembering him playing on the court to some degree. But I think when I did this, I started to kind of think about my own perceptions, and I kind of did it the same way as who were guys that who are important to me or who are guys that I thought of. So we'll get to my list next. But when you say Portland, like I said, Portland has 4 other really good candidates for this particular list. I didn't pick any of them. I'm assuming you didn't pick anybody else from Portland at this point.
I know because Bill Walton's career was too good before his injury because he could have been. I think he could have been under consideration maybe, but but I got to read this article to you. Can I read this article to you really quickly? I'm not going to read the whole thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Why Brandon Roy coming to the Minnesota Timberwolves makes them a 2013 NBA title contender. This was written in the preseason. This is the greatest thing I've ever read. I read in my life. Here we go.
Right. Okay, I'm ready.
All right. While it's great to see Roy bringing his game back to the NBA, it's disheartening for the Portland Trailers who couldn't even attempt to re-sign him because he had been amnestied by them and they're not allowed to re-sign him. They're in like, can Roy stay healthy? If so, the Timberwolves may not only just make the steal of the 2012 offseason, they may have transformed their struggling franchise into a title contender in the Western Conference. That is assuming Ricky Rubio can fully recover from a torn ACL he suffered in March. And now Kevin Love has an opportunity to prove that he is a championship caliber player. If they could put together a starting lineup, this is great. They could put together a starting lineup consisting of Ricky Rubio, Brandon Roy, Nicholas Batum, Kevin Love, and Nikola Pekovic. The T-Wolves will be one of the most offensively explosive starting lineups in the entire NBA.
Wow, that's something.
This is from Bleacher Report. Peter Emmerich. I don't know. I want to know whatever drink you were consuming this evening, or libations you were partaking in.
He did put in the caveat that if he stays healthy. So
well, he did say that, but he also said Ricky Rubio had to recover from ACL, which happened in March of 2012 when he gets signed.
Well, there you go.
So,
listen, man.
Anyways, okay. So, do you want me to go through my guys and then you go through yours?
Yeah, let's do that. Well, let's wrap up the Portland Trailblazers. So clearly, Bill Walton, who leads the Blazers to the 77 NBA championship, coming off of 3 championships, I guess two championships, 3 championships at UCLA, and just the way that he led that Blazers team, both as a scorer, as a passer, his basketball IQ, his ability as a teammate. Clearly, his career was cut short, but there were a lot of people that felt at the time that he had the potential to be one of the top 10, if not top 5 best players of all time. So Walton, tough blow for the Portland Trailblazers. Then you have Sam Bowie, who was drafted ahead of Jordan, who clearly that was a mistake no matter how healthy or unhealthy Sam Bowie was, but he had all the lower leg and foot injuries and never really lived up to his potential and didn't spend very much time in Portland at all before he got traded and moved on and was shortly thereafter out of the league. And then, of course, you have the Blazers drafting Greg Oden over Kevin Durant. And I don't think people at the time, the Blazers really didn't get lambasted for that. It's not like people thought, oh, that's a terrible pick. Oden had just led Ohio State to the NCAA championship game. He was the number 1 player coming out of high school and was just a tremendous, tremendous talent. And injuries just never allowed him to even come close. He never even provided a tantalizing stretch of 25 games or 50 games or probably even 12 games where he showed what his potential could be.
If it wasn't for Anthony Bennett, Greg Oden might be the biggest bust of number 1 in recent memory, right?
Bust for a different reason, though. Anthony Bennett was a bust not because of injury. I mean, Greg Oden clearly was a bust because of injury. I think if he had been able to stay healthy and be on the floor, Greg Oden's talent and ability to play the game, which we saw at Ohio State, if he had been able to bring the full measure of his talents to the NBA, I think he would have been a very, very good player. Versus Anthony Bennett, you can argue what his talent level was. Clearly, that was a draft that was not very strong from top to bottom. Nobody had really the opinions on who should have gone number 1 were all over the place. Nobody thought it was going to be Anthony Bennett, but nobody really had a consensus on who should have been number 1 in that draft. And so you can argue that Anthony Bennett's talent certainly wasn't worthy of the number 1 pick, but his career was not cut short because of injury. His career was cut short because of his talent level and his desire to compete at the NBA level and lots of other things. Whereas you look at Greg Oden, and I think had he remained healthy, he would have had the opportunity to be a very, very, very good NBA player. Obviously, your work ethic and your drive and all the things that the intangibles that we always talk about ultimately are going to drive how much success he would have had. But clearly, Greg Oden was a much more talented player than Anthony Bennett.
Yeah. All right, my second one, Mike, and this is a little more obviously not obscure, but it's an interesting one because this person's still a Hall of Famer. Okay, but when I think about this guy, I think about the 6 years that he could hardly play basketball in the middle of his career because of his foot. You know where I'm going yet? You got it? Detroit Pistons, Orlando Magic,
Grant
Grant
Hill.
Hill. Grant Hill.
Yep.
I think back to, I think about, it's amazing that his career and the middle of his career was basically obsolete. Like the middle of, when he was so his first 6 years of his career, he plays pretty much every game, 70, 80, 80, 81, 50, 74. But that was the lockout season was the 50 game season, I think. 98, 99, right? That was the lockout season. Is that right? Or maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I can't remember. Anyways, after that, he goes 4, 14, 29, and does not play. So in a 4-year stretch, he plays 37 games. And no one thought he was going to come back. And he still came back and he played games, and then he got injured again and only played 21. Then he played a season where he played all the games at 36 years old. And I want to be clear here. I'm not saying that his career was like completely derailed from he was not, but he could have been a top 25 player all time, top 15 player all time if he stayed healthy. That's the route I went on with this one, because I just remember I will always have in my head when he was going through the injured stuff, like they were very careful with him. Like he wasn't even going to Pistons games. And that game where he stood up with his foot, he stood up he was on the bench, and they put him on the big jumbotron, and he stood up, and he like had to put his arms down, and he stood up, put his hand down, and then you could just see like he wasn't right. And once again, I'm gonna be clear here, he's a Hall of Famer. But when I think back to, obviously this was when I was a little younger, so 94, the fact that he was playing at age 40 in the NBA is amazing to me with all the injuries he went through. So, I'm going a little bit, but I'm talking about a guy whose career theoretically was derailed because he probably would have been a top 15 player, top 20 player all time had he not had those injuries. Because even when he came back from the injuries, he wasn't the player that he was the first 5-6 years of his career.
Not even close. And when he left Detroit and he signed with the Magic, it all fell apart from there. And he ended up having 5 surgeries on his left ankle, according to what I'm reading here, which sounds right, thinking about back to that in the moment. And for me, when I think about Grant Hill, it always starts with Duke, right? You go back to the Christian Laettner, Grant Hill, Bobby Hurley, right? That team and all that those guys accomplished in the college game, and just the off the charts incredible athleticism that Grant Hill possessed when he was at Duke and when he first came to the NBA, and slowly throughout his NBA career, those injuries and surgeries robbed him of that athleticism. But just in a similar vein to your first guy, Brandon Roy, Grant Hill was a guy that could do everything out on the basketball court. Now, when I think about his game comparatively to how it might fit today, I'd say the one weakness probably in Grant Hill's game was his perimeter shot. And if you looked up his career stats, I'm sure he didn't make many threes in his career. So if you were to transport Grant Hill from those days into today's game, he certainly would have had to develop more of a 3-point shot than what he had throughout his career. But he was a guy who could score from multiple levels. He was a guy who could rebound. He was a guy who could pass the ball. He could handle it. Great guy, great teammate, great leader. Anybody who has ever talked about Grant Hill has had nothing but positive things to say about him. I know now he's in charge of USA Basketball, and he's just been a great ambassador for the game. And as you said, for him to go through all that time where the injuries robbed him of what should have been the prime years of his career, and then to still be able to come back and play for Phoenix, where he was able to play in almost every game over the course of 4 seasons. I think he probably missed maybe less than 15 games in 4 years as he finished up his career with the Phoenix Suns. And clearly he was a shell of himself in terms of his athleticism. But
do you know he didn't finish his
still
career with the Phoenix Suns though, Mike? Do you know he had a year with someone else?
I do
Don't
not know
look.
where he ended up. I'm not looking it up. The article that I'm reading does not say anything, so I don't have any
The
idea.
Los
I'm not even
Angeles
going to guess.
Clippers. He was on the team for 29 games.
Okay, there you go. There you go.
It's
Yeah,
always that it's always those funny pictures like Elijah Wan on the Toronto Raptors, right? Or is that Elijah was on the Toronto Raptors for?
there you go. Yeah, I mean, I to be honest, my recollection of Grant Hill, I probably have more direct memories of Grant Hill as a Duke player than I do of him as an NBA player. His most meaningful moments in the game of basketball probably came in a Duke uniform. And that's not to say that he didn't have a very, very, very good NBA career, but certainly you putting him on this list, I think, is more than justified because with his athleticism and his all around skill, and you look at what he did coming in early in his career in Detroit, that if he had been able to stay healthy, I'm sure that he would have continued to develop the things that were his strengths and continue to improve upon his weaknesses and become a better shooter over the course of his career. I do think that Grant Hill, because of that all around skill that he had and because of the athleticism, he certainly had the potential to be one of the best players to ever play the game, whether that means top 15 or top 25 or wherever. Certainly, he never came close to living up to his potential in any way. And again, due to the injury, not due to anything that in his game that caused him not to be able to perform at a certain level. It was just the fact that those injuries and the surgeries and all the problems that he had once he went to Orlando after leaving Detroit just curtailed his career in a way that it's almost a credit to him when you look at his career statistics that he was able to have as much success as he did, despite the fact that he had all the injuries that went along with the surgeries. And I know at some point he had a staph infection that got to the point that it was, threatening his life. So clearly he was a guy who, had he remained healthy, I think would have had a tremendous, tremendous career.
All right, and then I was between two for the last one, so I'm going to kind of do a 2-for-1 here, Mike. I'm going to do a 2-for-1 here.
Okay. Sounds good.
They were teammates too, so that makes it even more better.
Okay.
Houston Rockets teammates.
Yao Ming and Tracy McGrady.
There you go. Wow, look at you. You are good at this game. Yao Ming would have been my definitive third one. Okay, he would have been my third one, purely because he only played. I can't believe he only played 7 years in the league. That's crazy to me. Like there was a year that so he didn't play the 2009-2010 season, and then 2010-2011 he played 5 games. I'm not counting those 5 games as a season. Okay, he played 82, 82, 80 the first 3. And then it was all downhill from there. 57, 48, 55, 77 in 08, 09, and then he didn't play. Rookie of the year, it was second place in the rookie of the year he came out. Only another guy who was plagued by injury most of his career, he lost rookie of the year too, is Amari Stoudemire. Amari Stoudemire. Okay. Yao Ming, effective defender. I always remember wanting to tune into Shaq versus Yao Ming. Okay, I wanted to watch those games. Those were appointment viewing on TNT. All right, and yeah, obviously, like he had a great career. He is in the Hall of Fame. But his career would have been way better. He played 486 games for this career. And no, I think he could have had a much better career. Obviously, being 7'6" probably played a role in it. Okay. And then when we talk about Tracy McGrady, and then I'll let you talk about both of them. Tracy McGrady probably, and once again, he's also a Hall of Famer. But when we talk about Tracy McGrady, like I think him and Grant Hill have a lot of things in common. Now he played way more games than Grant Hill, or he played not way more games, but he was more sporadic in his games. Like, later in his career is really where it hurt him. Okay. Having knee and back issues. But I just think of him being such a dynamic scorer, a two-way player, just always just. I think one of my favorite games, and I don't honestly like. I'm pretty sure it was his first year, right, when he was guarding Jordan, 97, 98. I feel like that sticks out in my mind. I think because I feel like, and this is just me trying to remember. I was 12 years old at the time. I feel like McGrady they played Toronto and Chicago played Toronto and like the Lakers in a back to back because 97, 98 would have been Kobe's rookie season too, right?
Sounds right to
Is that
me.
right?
Yep.
I feel like they played them like if it wasn't consecutive games, it was close to one another. And just getting to see Jordan go against McGrady and against Kobe Bryant in back to back games or semi close games, I just remember that being cool because everyone assumed it was gonna be, kind of like Kobe obviously was the guy, like the passing of the torch situation, because Jordan had hinted that he was going to be retiring and all that other stuff. And so, but I just remember McGrady wowing me throughout his career. You know, he finished in the top 10 of MVP voting 6 times. Uh, just a dynamic player who I think once again, if he hadn't been uh, injury plagued, he'd be even more finally remembered. But like Yao Ming, I think kids today know who Yao Ming is. Maybe, possibly. If I said to a random kid who was not an NBA like is a current NBA fan but not like an avid, there's no way Tracy McGrady's name. Like we put Tracy McGrady's card out at basketball camp, Mike. There's no one. No one's gonna be like, oh, I know that guy. Like I don't think so. And he's a Hall of Famer, by the way. Just putting that out there.
Yeah, let me start with McGrady. I think when you talk about McGrady and Grant Hill, there's some similarities there. And I think probably when you look at McGrady's career, in his season, which was, I think, 0203, he averaged 32 a game. There's not too many guys in NBA history that have averaged 32 a game. And his best skill obviously was scoring the basketball, getting to the rim, but
Do you know how
he
many
also
shots a
showed
game he took in that year, Mike? I mean, I don't know if you've pulled up. Do you have it pulled up?
I have it pulled up 24 shots a game.
That's crazy.
It's a lot of
That's like
shots.
James
He shot
Hart.
45
That's like Russell Westbrook in the year he's trying to get the triple double numbers.
shot 48%, 45% from the floor. But the other interesting thing that season, if you look at it, is he shot 38% from three on 6 attempts. And then the next season, he comes back and averages 28 a game, and he's up to 7.7 attempts. And then from there, it started to go downhill. Injuries started to affect him, and he just was never the same guy. But if I compare him and Grant Hill, for both of them, the athleticism was off the charts. They both had the ability to handle the ball. They both were really good passers. Both could be good defenders. I think what made McGrady probably a better scorer than Grant Hill was just his ability to shoot the ball from the perimeter at a level that I don't think Grant Hill ever got to or probably ever would have been able to match. Now, if you look at McGrady's percentages from three, he never shot over 40% except in his last season where basically he was taking less than half a three per game. And for his career, he shot just under 34%. So it's not like he's shooting in an era like we have today. He was playing in a completely different time in the NBA where guys weren't shooting the same volume of threes and coaches weren't trying to design plays to be able to get guys threes and everything that goes along with that. But he certainly was a guy who could score at all three levels, right? He could shoot the three, he could pull up and
Yeah.
shoot in the mid range, and he could get the ball all the way to the rim. And he was just tremendously, tremendously athletic. And I do think that he's a guy who, in some ways, he was forgotten to history because his teams never made it out of the first round of the playoffs. So he never really had a meaningful playoff moment that you could point to. Whereas you have other guys who maybe didn't win titles, who had successful careers. You look at Dame Lillard, for example, who has the two series winning shots, and you got Dame time and all this stuff. And that happened because although Dame hasn't won a title to this point in his career, he has those memorable playoff moments of winning series and having big games in playoffs. Whereas with McGrady, there just really isn't anything. And I think that's why when you talk about him being lost to history, that's why I think that that's the case, is because he just never had a meaningful playoff moment because he was never able to get his team out of the first round of the playoffs, which you can call that an indictment on him. You could say that it's a product of the teams that he played on. But clearly, if you just in isolation look at Tracy McGrady as a player and you think about just what maybe could have been had he been able to remain healthy or had he been in the right situation to be able to maximize the team around him. He's certainly a guy who, from a talent standpoint, I don't want to say he underachieved because, again, Hall of Famer and a guy whose injuries obviously impacted him throughout his career. But certainly, I would guess if you replayed Tracy McGrady's career multiple times, that you'd probably get some different outcomes where he had memorable playoff moments and he led teams much deeper into the playoffs than what actually happened in this particular real iteration of his career. So, yeah, I think your point of him being lost to history is a good one. And just the athleticism and the skill level that Tracy McGrady had. That's what I think of when I think of him, as just a guy who had every skill you could want in the game. And then you combine that with the tremendous athleticism. I mean, yeah, at his peak, he was one of the best scorers probably in league history over those couple seasons in the middle of his career where he was healthy and producing at a high level. And then Yao Ming, I think you have to look at, as you said, the Shaq versus Yao Ming was always entertaining simply because of the sheer size of those two guys. And then it's hard to discount Yao's cultural influence in terms of helping to bring the NBA's popularity even higher in his home country of China. And then he was just such a unique player in terms of his immense size and at the same time his immense skill. But you look at a guy who's 7'6" and weighed over 300 pounds and running up and down an NBA floor, and clearly that toll that it took on him cut his career far shorter than I'm sure he and the Houston Rockets would have liked. But during the time while he played, he certainly was a unique player. We haven't seen very many guys at his size have his type of skill. And then you combine that, like I said, with the cultural significance of a guy from China coming to the US, playing so well, being an engaging personality and somebody that fans liked, and what that helped to do to popularize the NBA in China and around the world is probably can't be overstated, in all honesty.
Yep. All right, Mike, your guys.
Okay, so when you came up with Brandon Roy and said that it was because of a personal connection, right? And somebody that you enjoyed, in your case, playing with on a video game and watching, getting an opportunity to see him play. And so I started to think about, when you posed this to me, I tried to think about guys that I was a fan of, guys who I enjoyed watching play and then had their careers upended by injury. And sort of, I feel like I got cheated out of seeing the best of them. So I'm going to ask you that you want me to, the order that you want me to go in, and then I'll go in that order. So how, in terms of obscurity, do you want me to go from the most obscure to the least obscure, or vice versa?
Let's go least obscure to most obscure, and then you can try to get me to guess, Mike. I probably won't get the obscure guy because he probably was someone before I was alive. So go ahead.
Probably, I would guess. I'm pretty sure that's probably, well, it's probably close. So I think he was probably in his heyday before you were born. But let's start with the guy who is the least obscure. I would say the two guys that I'm going to come up with are probably on a similar level, and they've both been they've been in the spotlight for things other than their NBA careers in they both haven't been in the same spotlight, but they've had the spotlight on them for things other than just their NBA career. So the first guy
Okay.
is was a member of he was a tremendous college player. I believe he was a four-time college player of the year. He was a number one overall draft pick in the NBA. He was later joined by another guy who played his same position on his NBA team, and they formed a duo that made it to the NBA Finals, but was not able to complete uh, winning a championship. Him and this other player, who eventually the other player eventually won a couple of championships with that same roster, but this player probably had what you would consider to be a better college career than NBA career because of the injuries that ultimately beset him. So I don't know if those clues get you to who I'm thinking of, or if I can give you one that I know you'll know right away as soon as I give you this clue.
Well,
So if you can't get it off those, I'll give you the next clue.
Houston guy, right? Houston guy.
Houston guy. Houston guy.
So it was with Olajuwon,
Correct.
right?
Correct. Well, if you got this part, and you should have no problem.
It's
You
got to
should
be.
have no
Is it
problem.
Ralph Sampson? Is that right? Ralph Sampson.
Ralph Sampson. Ralph Sampson. So
Look at me. Look at me.
here's
Virginia, right? He played for Virginia, right?
Virginia. Very good. So
A couple.
here's what I'm going to say about Ralph Sampson. And again, I told you that there was sort of a personal connection to each one of my choices. So
Did you play against Ralph Sampson?
I did not play against Ralph Sampson. Did not play against Ralph Sampson. But anybody who's listened to the podcast at all, I'm assuming probably knows that I grew up a fan of North Carolina and Virginia in the ACC, Ralph Sampson in the ACC at the same time as my all-time favorite player, Michael Jordan. Sampson's was actually, I said he was the college player of the year four times. He was only the college player of the year three times, 81, 82, and 83. But despite the fact that I was a North Carolina fan and that Virginia was in the ACC with the Tar Heels, I just loved Ralph Sampson. At that time, that was also when Patrick Ewing came into the landscape of college basketball at Georgetown. And I was always a big fan of Sampson. I didn't like Georgetown. I didn't like Patrick Ewing. There was a huge game that they played. I believe it was probably the 83 season, I believe, which was Ewing's freshman year, Sampson's senior year. That was the year that Georgetown made it to. I believe they went to the Final Four that year. It's all kind of all of it runs together. But anyway, there was a big
That's
game between
before me,
Virginia and
so I
Georgetown.
can't tell you.
That was yeah, I understand, but huge game, probably at that time one of the biggest college basketball games in history of those two guys matching up. And I used to just always, for whatever reason, just say to my dad, I remember watching games with him, and I would always just, we'd call Ralph, we just called him Big Ralph. Like, hey, what time's Big Ralph play tonight? And just, he was a guy that was kind of before his time in that he was 7'4". It's a little on the skinny side, but he wanted to play on the perimeter. So at that time, Ewing was more of the prototypical center, right? He's underneath the basket, he's blocking shots, he's posting up. Sampson was a guy who wanted to handle the ball, wanted to shoot a little bit outside. Not that he couldn't play on the inside, but he was just a guy who was multidimensional. And obviously, as the three-time college basketball player of the year during an era where college basketball was not what it is today, that meant something. And then drafted number one overall in the NBA and had a really good start to his career. So in his first year, he averaged 21 and 11 and was the NBA Rookie of the Year. And then eventually gets hooked up with Akeem Olajuwon, and the two of them famously upset the Lakers. I'm sure you and everybody who's listening to the podcast, even if you weren't alive when this happened, you've seen the highlight of the Sampson shot in the lane where he kind of gets a little lob pass and turns in the lane
Yeah.
and throws it in to beat the Lakers. We've all seen that shot. And Sampson played 82 games his first year, played 82 games his second year, played 79 games his third year. And in those 3 years, he averaged 21, 22, and 19. And rebounds, he averaged 11, 10, and 11. So his career is off to a tremendous, tremendous start. And then the injuries start. And over the next few years, he plays 43, 48, 19, 29, 61, 26, 25, 10, out of the league by 1992. So a guy who, again, dominated college basketball during a time when college basketball was probably close to its peak, and then came into the NBA, rookie of the year, a guy who averaged a double-double in his first 3 seasons, and seemingly with Akeem Olajuwon was building something that could have been tremendously special, and just had a multitude of skills that big guys at that time didn't have. And then injuries just slowly chipped away at his ability to be effective until it got to a point where his knees were so bad that, I mean, he just couldn't even. I just remember him trying to labor up and down the court and he couldn't do it. And we've talked about it tonight, but you look back at the history of the NBA and there's a lot of big men that, for whatever reason, just the size of their body,
Big
running up and
Z.
down an NBA floor. Yeah. Like the number of big guys that are 7 foot tall and above that have been able to remain healthy. There are obviously some that Kareem, great example of a guy who was able to do it for a long, long time at a very, very high level. But there, unfortunately, the history of the league is just littered with guys who were over 7 feet tall that never were able to fulfill their potential because of knee, lower leg, foot injuries, and they just never got to what they could be. And Sampson was just such a great talent and such a unique talent, especially for his era. Big guys just didn't play that way. If I think of the big men of that time period, you're talking about guys who are bangers, playing in the low post, can't shoot the ball from the outside, guys you wouldn't want to dribble the ball more than once without having it taken away. He just had every skill in the book, and injuries robbed him of what could have been a great career. And like I said, I was a big fan of him in college, and that fandom continued on into the NBA. And it was just one of those things that you were so sad to see somebody who had that type of talent just to have it taken away because of injury. So Sampson was number one on my list in terms of being probably the most well known. I would say this next guy is probably equally as well known. He was
Okay.
also uh, plays a different position, and this guy ended up with the Orlando Magic. He was traded to get to the Orlando Magic for another guy who had an outstanding career and is in the Hall of Fame. This guy played point guard, but was unique to that position. And he had an alter ego that
Oh,
made
it's Penny Hardaway.
commercials. Penny Hardaway.
Little Penny.
Penny
Little
Hardaway.
Penny.
Little Penny. Little Penny. Little Penny. Um,
Yeah, that's more my formative years. Like
okay.
I knew
There
that
you
one
go.
right away.
Okay. So Penny Hardaway teams up with Shaq, and you think about those two guys as a duo, and they're coming into the league again in a different era. So Penny Hardaway was not a great 3-point shooter, probably was only an average mid-range shooter, which if you project those two guys into today's game, I'm not sure if you just drop them both into the game today that they would be they'd obviously be a great duo because of their talent and they'd figure it out. But skill wise, that era was completely different. And Penny Hardaway, if you go back and you watch his highlights at Memphis or you watch his highlights from early in his career in Orlando before his knee injuries started to take their toll, the athleticism that Penny Hardaway had at that time, he was as athletic as any guy in the history of the league has ever been. And then you take, and this is, I think, what made him so popular, is just the flair that he played with. Tremendous, tremendous, tremendous passer, but not just a passer of the fundamental make the easy pass, but just a guy who had a bag when it came to being able to pass the ball. And you look at the first five, I guess probably the first four seasons of his career, goes 82 games, 77, 82, then 59. And those first 4 years, pretty good. Um, Averaged over 20 in the last three of those first four seasons, 7.5 assists, and just was a guy who was incredibly, incredibly exciting. And as a teammate and as a duo with Shaq, there was just something about the flair that Penny Hardaway played with. And it's funny because so I'm talking about again guys that had like some meaning for me, which is why I picked Sampson, why I picked Penny Hardaway, and why I picked my last guy, which I'll talk about here in a second. But it's funny because growing up, I look at Penny Hardaway and I look at his athleticism and I look at the flair that he played with. And I guess I kind of always think about like, how did I play the game? And so my dad always used to kind of make fun of me that because growing up, as anybody who listens to the podcast knows, I hate the Celtics. And I've always hated the Celtics from the time I was a little kid. When I was a kid, I hated Larry Bird and I love Magic. And clearly anybody who listens also knows that Michael Jordan's my favorite player. And so my dad always used to make fun of me because he liked Bird and the Celtics. So he and I would always kind of battle back and forth on that. And I guess whenever I would have a serious conversation with my dad, I always came back to, I think I became a fan of guys that did things or could do things that I knew I would never be able to do. When I watched Larry Bird, I'm like, I should be able to do that. When I watch Magic Johnson or I watched Penny Hardaway or I watched Jordan, like those guys, the flair that they played with and the athleticism just were things that I knew I was never going to be able to touch. And so I think that's why I became fans of those players. But I just think about the Penny Hardaway highlight package, both in terms of his dunks and his passes, and just how good those guys were in their first couple seasons together and what potentially could have been had Penny not gotten hurt. I just think that it's hard to imagine what Penny Hardaway could have continued to develop into had he been able to combine the athleticism and the gifts that he had with even more experience as he was getting into what should have been the prime years of his career, just like all these guys, right? Sampson, Penny Hardaway, you're taking away what would have been the best years of their career due to injury. And so I just think that, again, the highlight package that Penny Hardaway brought to the table, combined with, I think, what could have been with him and Shaq, just that's why I have him on this list, and just how much I enjoyed watching him both as a college player at Memphis State and then as a pro player. And then now he's kind of had a second act as a college basketball coach and going back to his alma mater. So that's kind of what I was getting at with Sampson. Was probably more famous as a college player than Penny was at Memphis State. And then he went on to have a second career. Oh, I forgot to mention with Sampson, when I went to the junior NBA conference in Chicago, probably in what year was that? Whew, man, it's been a long time now. 2000, right after we started
Is
the
that when you had
podcast.
breakfast with Kenny Atkinson?
2000, yeah, when I had lunch with Kenny Atkinson. So I sat and I probably had a 30-minute conversation at least with Kenny Atkinson while he was with the Nets at the time. And I was just sitting there. We ate lunch and had a conversation. And then that same conference at one of the like late night events was sitting at the bar, and actually it was during the famous Celtics Wizards John Wall and Bradley Beal against Isaiah Thomas playoff series. I stood at the bar with Ralph Sampson for at least at least a half of that game, if not maybe more, and just talk to Sampson. So that was really a cool experience for me to be able to do that. And Ralph was super nice and gracious and just stood at the bar and talked to me while we were watching the game, just like two guys would any other place, not just a fan and and Ralph Sampson, but just again two guys just sitting there talking basketball, watching a game. So that was cool. So again, personal connection to Ralph in that way. Not that I claim to have any, other than that conversation, but still it was cool. Somebody that you were a fan
Yeah.
of as a kid that you got an opportunity to talk to. All right, my last guy, most obscure. I don't know if you'll
Okay.
get this guy, so I'll try to give you as much context as I can and see if you can come
Okay.
up with it. So this guy won an NBA title. He
Well,
played
that's a lot of
with
options.
he played with multiple Hall of Famers. He played for a coach when he won that title who I believe he's definitely in the Hall of Fame. I don't know if he's in the Hall of Fame both as a coach and as a player, but it's certainly possible. One of his teammates was a multiple time slam dunk champion. One of his teammates was one of the very first players to come out of high school and go directly to the NBA. His nickname was, and this is the clue that if you're going to get it, this is probably the way you would get it. This guy's nickname was the Boston Strangler.
Okay, I got.
Another clue?
I I was wait. Can you let me just? I was thinking when you said multiple slam dunk contest, I was thinking Dominique Wilkins was who I was thinking of. Is that who I wanted to think of,
Okay.
or am I in the wrong?
No, it is not. It is not Dominique Wilkins. I'll give you the team.
Well, no. I'm not saying it's Dominique Wilkins, but I'm saying when you talked about he played with the guy who won multiple slam dunk contests, I went with
That
Dominique
is not.
Wilkins was
It's
the
not
guy.
Dominique Wilkins that he. It's not Dominique Wilkins that he played with
Okay.
before. This is pre Dominique or, eh, yeah, pre Dominique is when this guy was at his best. He played his career crossed paths with Dominique, but Dominique was not. This guy was at his peak before Dominique was in the league.
I got nothing, Mike. Go ahead.
Okay. So the team is the Philadelphia 76ers. They won the
Oh,
title
Julius
in
Irving.
83. So Julius Irving is the slam dunk, multiple time dunk champion. Who's the guy who came directly out of high school that played on the 83 Sixers?
I was not born. I don't know. I can't. I
Was traded there. Originally went to the ABA. Was traded to Philadelphia from Houston. He was known for his offensive rebounding prowess and for being really sweaty, dripping sweat at the free throw line. Played
I
center.
I got
He's
nothing.
also he has a biblical name. His last name's Malone.
Oh, Moses. Got it.
Moses. Moses Malone. So it came directly out of
I could have said Carl there.
there you go. And the coach, who the coach of that team was? Who was also a player?
Um, Hall of Famer. You said he said he was a Hall of
White
Famer.
guy. Yeah, white guy.
Is it? It's a guy I would know. I'll know the name when you say it,
I think you'll know the name when I say it. Billy Cunningham.
and I will
No?
know that name.
Okay. Anyway, so
No.
Billy Cunningham was the coach of that team. Anyway, So the guy that I'm thinking of, and I'll be curious to know if you've even heard of him, Andrew Toney.
No,
Okay. So
I got I
Andrew
got.
Toney,
Let
see,
me
so that's a good
let
obscurity
me.
factor.
I'm gonna Google him right now.
All right, Google Andrew Toney. So Andrew Toney was a guy, and like as a kid, my first favorite player was Dr. J. And so as a result of that, I don't really remember much about Dr. J in the ABA because you couldn't really find much about the ABA. Cleveland obviously was not an ABA city. So my fandom for Dr. J, the first thing I remember about him was the slam dunk contest in the ABA and seeing highlights of him jumping from the free throw line. That's actually probably one of my earliest recollections of anything pro basketball on TV. So that made me become a fan of Dr. J. And then when he came over to the NBA, I have vague recollections of the series that they lost against Bill Walton and the Trailblazers in 77 and seeing all the highlights clearly many times in my life since then. But I became a Sixers fan. And so watching Philadelphia and watching Dr. J, Andrew Toney became a guy that I just sort of gravitated to because he was somebody who really was a tremendous mid-range shooter. Like his game, completely old school, not really a three-point shooter, a guy who in his career averaged less than 1 3 per game, but was a guy who was just completely deadly from the mid-range. And he was known, as I said, as the Boston Strangler because he had huge games both in the regular season and in the playoffs against the Boston Celtics. So the year that they won the title, which I believe, well, which was 1983, they ended up playing the Celtics, I believe, in, I think they played them in the conference final. Anyway, Andrew Toney had huge games in both 82 in the Eastern Conference Finals, and that was when I think the Celtics won that series in 1982. And Andrew Toney had 30 in game two, 39 in game four, 34 in game seven. And it just was, he was a guy, because I hated the Celtics and Toney was known as the Boston
The
Strangler,
Sixers beat the
it just
Celtics,
attracted me
Mike.
to him.
They lost to the Lakers in
In
'82.
82. Yeah, 82, that was correct. 82 was the year they made it to the finals and they lost the Lakers. And the next year, 83, is when Moses had the
Yeah.
faux, and they lost one game in the playoffs and ended up winning the title that season. And Andrew Toney was just a guy who, I just always think of him as an assassin, a guy who, if you needed a big basket, he could just get you a basket. And you could give him the ball, clear out, and he could just create space and get to his shot. And he was number 22. And when I got to high school, believe it or not, I wanted to be number 22 because of Andrew Toney. And Strongsville back at the time, we had one jersey for home games and one jersey for away games that had different numbers on them. So I was number 22 at home for Andrew Toney, and then I was number 33 on the road because those two numbers went together. And then when I went to Kent, I wanted to be number 22, but because I was the seventh recruit in a in a seven-player freshman class, 22 was already taken. My roommate ended up having number 22, so that I went with number 12. But I loved Andrew Toney. I love the fact that he played with Dr. J on the Sixers. I loved his style of play. I felt like he always came up with big shots. And then, like I said, because he was known as the Boston Strangler and he was always beating up on my least favorite team, the Boston Celtics, during an era when, again, we're talking his heyday, his best 4 seasons were his first four in the league. And he came into the league in 1980. And by 1984 was when his career started to, when the injuries started to take place. He got injured, I think, in 85 and then basically was almost done at that point. But he averaged 13 as a rookie, 16 in his second year, 19, and then 20. So he was a very, very important player for that Sixers team. Kind of a forgotten guy simply because of all the star power on that team. When you think about Dr. J and Moses and just Maurice Cheeks and the guys that they had, Andrew Toney sometimes gets lost, especially because he was his star ascended very quickly and just as quickly descended as a result of the leg
What
injuries
did
that he
he, Mike?
suffered.
You know what he did when he retired from the NBA?
I do not.
He became an elementary school teacher.
There we go. Andrew Toney, the Boston Strangler.
Well, let me teach you some lessons. You reach and I'll teach.
There you go. Andrew Toney, he's a guy I'd love to have on the podcast just to talk and get his recollection of that situation, talk to him about being an elementary school teacher. That'd be a cool conversation. I'm going to make it a mission, man. Andrew Toney, try to get him on. I don't know what we got to do, but I'm going to give it a shot, see if we can do it. So, anyway, so those are my three. Like I said, I feel like Sampson, loved him when he was in college and got an opportunity to meet him. Penny Hardaway, just even to this day, when I watch Penny Hardaway packages, highlight packages, I just get excited watching him get up and do the dunks and the fancy passes and all the things, and just makes you wonder about again the potential that he had, especially when you combine him and Shaq and what they could have potentially done. And then Andrew Toney, like I said, I was a huge fan of the Sixers during that same era. 12, 13, 14 years old, sort of like your sweet spot for falling in love with teams and players. And the fact that he was playing alongside Doc and that 83 Sixers team. And I think back to that era, you had the Celtics, you had the Lakers, and you had Philly. It was definitely Philly number one, Lakers number two, and Boston number however many teams there were in the league at that point. So the fact that he was the Boston Strangler just made it even more special. So I know he probably wouldn't have been on very many people's lists, but again, the personal connection that I felt to that team, and like I said, 22 was my number as a kid, and it was because of Andrew Toney. So
There you go, Mike. All right, we did it. That
we did
episode
it.
went a lot longer than I thought it was going to go. Mike,
And there's a lot of good ones. I mean, we left off a ton. We left off a ton of guys that we could have easily talked about that clearly had careers that who knows where they would have gone. It's just there's so many guys that could have easily stepped into the void and been guys that could have had great careers. And probably most recently, Derrick Rose is probably the guy, right? That when you think about somebody that was on a trajectory that just had his career kind of stolen from him, I'd say Derrick Rose is one, and then the other guy that really never did anything in the NBA was Jay Williams from Duke, another point guard who had the motorcycle injury and never really got an opportunity to demonstrate his
there's
his
one in
skill.
the NBA right now, Mike. There's one in the NBA right now. Your boy,
Who's that?
Zion, baby. Zion.
Yeah, Zion's going to be
Zion.
Zion's
Zion in five
Zion's
years from now
definitely
could be on this list.
he's definitely going to be on this list, and there'll be enough crazy Zion highlights to put together a package that will be similar to Penny Hardaway. Although I would argue at this point that of all the guys that we talked to, Zion probably has the slimmest resume of any of the guys compared to anybody that we talked about this, on this podcast tonight in terms of his pro resume. Now his highlight package might look as good as anybody's, but his actual resume and what he's produced on the floor, it's a tragedy that he. I just think back to again how excited we were when he came into the league, and the fact that he's never been able to stay healthy and be on the floor. It's just a shame, and it is for a lot. Again, everybody we talked about tonight, same thing, right? Every one of those guys had a tremendous amount of potential and demonstrated it early on in their career, and then they just weren't able to sustain it because of the injuries that stole their career way too early. So, all fun guys to watch. A lot of what ifs in that list that we came up with tonight, but fun kind of talk about some guys that we haven't thought about in a while. So good episode.
There you go.
Perfect. All right. Well, we'll leave it there. We will see if next week there's any NBA actual news, or who knows, we'll be back with another gimmick. We'll have to see. We'll get creative and have to think about what we want to talk about next week. But maybe there'll be something that'll happen. But if not, we'll come up with something interesting to talk about.
All right, we'll see. Maybe
Oh,
there'll be some news.
I don't know. It's clearly the dead time in the NBA. So, all right, we'll leave it there. Thanks to everyone for checking out tonight's NBA episode of the Hoopheads Pod, and we will catch you on the next one. Thanks.